Welcome back to the Micro Skills Podcast. I'm Dan Sanchez, and we're on a mission to empower marketers with what's going on with AI to make the most out of it. Today, I'm thrilled to be talking to Ryan Gibson about something he's created, something he's experimenting with called living buyer personas. So, Ryan, for starters, just welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm honored because this is new territory for me. So I'm almost like anxious speaking about it.
I know. Well, it's like I said before we started recording, it's new territory for everybody. Everybody's pushing the envelope. Everybody's in experimental stage. I
Yeah,
wouldn't say anybody's got like the inbound marketing like method of AI yet. No one's
yeah,
figured it out. Everybody's experimenting right now and trying to see what they think they can get out of it. There's some tried and true plays out there, like, oh, I can use AI to turn my podcast transcript into content. Great. Like, okay, everybody's kind of figured that out. Like we got that one thing figured out, but that's not a strategy. That's a very small tactic that we were already doing. So I'm excited to look at some of these, some fringe cases of where
yeah.
people are plugging things together and making some useful stuff with it. And I think that's what you have going on here. So let's
Thank
let's
you.
start with explaining like the concept of living buyer personas and kind of
Yeah.
how it originated for you.
So to explain what it is, just in like frank terms, I've integrated, very deep first party data into like just the back end of Open API's assistants, right? So because there's like the Chat GPT that you can build your custom Chat GPTs, and there's the open AI section where you can have API keys talk to each other, right? So what I've done is I just uploaded a data set into an assistant and I connected it to Slack. And the reason I wanted to do that is I wanted to be able to query my own data in Slack. And there's a rationale for that. So how did that come up? How did this come to be? There are sort of two driving forces, and this might take me a bit to get through, Dan. So I hope this is not like a rambling answer. The first one was, you know, when I worked in house, one of the challenges, and you've worked in house in companies before. One of like the key friction points to your day to day is just trying to find stuff, like trying to find information that you need to make
All the time.
decisions in like that in that moment, right? And they're spread out all over the place. Sometimes they're in a Drive folder or an online server. Maybe they're in some type of wiki, like a Notion or a Confluence. It's in a Slack thread
Yeah.
buried somewhere, right?
It felt like it was
And
an ongoing thing to talk about creating a single source of truth because of that
yeah,
problem. Like it was a
so
constant thing for years, and it
always
never
is.
happened.
Yeah. And that's even happens in meetings. Like you're in meetings and you're asking questions and you're like trying to find information on the fly. So I had this thought around like, well, what if I could just have the information come to me like instantly that I need to find to make that decision in the moment? And then the second sort of guiding thought in my brain was I work as a consultant now. I have for the last few years. The output of my work is deep, like qualitative first party analysis of like buying journeys and how B2B companies make decisions on like vendors and how they buy solutions. And it's like a lot. Like if you've seen one of my reports, it's a lot. And I try to whittle it down to executive summaries and action points for people. But like most consultants, a lot of what I do ends up living in a folder somewhere. Right. And that's not new. That's happened for decades. I've been in B2B 21 years, and consultants come in with good work and sometimes it gets lost to time. So I was like, I didn't like that. I didn't like that it just sits there and doesn't necessarily get socialized. So I was thinking, how can I get this data into the daily workflow of people? So I started looking around for options around what I can use to do that. And I had this moment of clarity because I still work as a fractional part-time for a software company here in Canada. So I'm in their Slack all day, just seeing what's going on, chiming in the conversations. And I was like, what if I could just pull the information here? And that's when I started looking for the integration. And that's sort of what led me to living buyer persona. So now what it is it's all the data sets that I gather from first party data. It's in an assistant through Open API, and I can go into Slack and just query the data in real time. So I'll stop there, but that was sort of like that was the progression to how I got to where I am.
So tell me a little bit about the how it's all integrated together. Like
Yeah.
when you're using Slack as the interface to call the information. Where is it getting called from?
Yeah. So this is where I'm still in the journey of trying to understand how to format the data in a good way. But what's happening is, if anyone has built their own GPT, which I have, right? That's how I started. I just used the regular build your own GPT. I saw actually one of my cousins who does PR. He'd built his own back in October, or when it first got launched in November, I think. If you know the timelines better than I would, and he'd built something like most of us have done to build their own sort of internal database that they use. I was like, that was great. So I dumped all my information from my own work into there because I have an online guide. And I was like, it'd be really interesting to like build that for my own clients who use the online interview guide. So I started there. And how you build the data sets into that, the basic 101 way is just PDFs. So you're downloading all the information to PDF, or sorry, into a document. You're downloading the PDF and you're uploading that PDF back into ChatGPT. So you can do the same thing on the OpenAI assistant side, where you can upload this exact same PDFs. And if you look at the two sort of operating systems, the ChatGPT operating system and the OpenAI operating system, they're almost identical, right? There's more bells and whistles on that side, on the OpenAI side. So I was like, okay, well, how do I connect these two? So I just started Googling videos, like YouTube videos. Same way you like, how do I fix my
Yep.
broken sink? How do I
Yep.
connect these two things? So I found a few ways to do that, and it's either you can do it through code scripts, which I found a Medium blog of someone who did that. So you grab the API key from Slack, and you have to create like your own sort of app through the API key, and then you grab the API key through OpenAI, and you can spin up a script to just have them talk to each other. But that's not me. Like I'm not a coder. I don't know how to use any type of coding language. I'm that use case where I like no code stuff. So I used as Zapier. There's other ones you can use. There's one I found called Plugbear, and I'm sure that all the other integration softwares like Make, I know there's other ones. They're probably going to have their own version of this. So what I've done is you just add the API keys into Zapier's workflow, and then they start talking to each other. And it's pretty quick. It looks like it depends on if they're throttling or not, like the usage that day, because you buy credits and
Yep.
then you do an API call, and then the machines talk to each other. And the fastest I've seen it done is like 3 seconds for me to query data and get it back. Last night I was testing it before we talked, so I wanted to see what was happening. And it was taking about 10 to 12 seconds, but even then, that's still not too
Yeah.
bad.
I noticed it was slow last night too for some reason. I'm like, oh, lots of people using Chat GPT right now because it's taking forever for it to knock out an answer.
Yeah, yeah. So I hope that answered the question. I might have missed something in
Yeah.
that, but that's really
So
like the basics of how
you're
it
you're
works.
starting with Slack. It's going through Zapier, calling
Yeah,
and then calling ChatGPT's AI
yeah,
through the API is
correct.
kind of
Yeah,
the three-part piece here. So
correct.
where are
Yeah,
you uploading data?
into the back end of OpenAI. So I can even
Oh,
go
you
into
can
it right
store it
now.
back there.
Yes.
I thought it was
So
just a place where you plugged into their API. I didn't realize you could uh, so are you uploading PDFs in the back end? Is it a custom GPT or is it in the
it's in the API
developer
It's
area?
in the API developer part.
Interesting.
So if you go to, so I just open API now, and there's two. It's like choose your own adventure, right? So they have Chat GPT box. Do you want to build that, or do you want to go to the back end API section? And that's the part that often for people like me who are not technical, like that's intimidating. It still is, to be honest. But that is where there's a little robot in their sidebar navigation says assistance, and that is basically identical to building your own GPT, like private GPT that
Interesting.
people have been doing. So you can just go up in the sidebar and it says create with a little plus sign, and you look at it, it's almost identical to how you do to GPT. There's a few more elements that you need to sort of understand, and you have to, based on what part of the model you pick, for people who aren't familiar, like there's different GPT models now that you can access. Like there's 4 turbo, just 4, 3.5 turbo, 16K. Like there's all these variations.
Yeah,
And
and they're
some of
different costs
them,
too, right?
yeah, and some of them
Yeah.
won't retrieve data from static documents that I've uploaded. Some will. So you just have to make sure you have the right one uh, added. There's a section in those assistants called retrieval. I'm just reading it right now. Retrieval enables the
Yeah.
assistant with knowledge from your files. Once a file is uploaded, you can retrieve from the content. That has to be checkboxed. And then
Yeah.
once you upload the PDFs, you're pretty much set the first part of it. And then you have to set up all the infrastructure. But that's no different than what I was doing with my own data set in my personal GPT, where I'm just uploading PDFs, right? What I've heard though, and I don't know if this is true, Dan, so this would be something for you to sort of investigate as you move along. I was talking to a colleague this week, and he said his understanding is that the API is actually has less hallucinations, is more accurate, and is faster than the GPT side of things. I don't know if that's true, but I'm hearing
It
that. So
it sounds like it would be true just because a developer can dial it in. Like on the GPT side, you don't get to pick which GPT you use. I mean, you do. You get to pick between 3.5 and 4, great. But there's
yeah,
actually all these versions of it. And there's also another tool I've noticed when you're going through the API. There's like a little slider. I forgot what they call it, but like, do you want it to be more exact or do you want to give it more freedom and giving you an answer back?
okay, interesting.
Right.
I haven't seen that one. That's good to know.
Because I've used some tools where I can like for my own CRM, there's like send information to GPT and get it back and put it into a field. And there's this like little slider that I've seen on a few tools now where it's like how how do you want your data back? Do you want it to be stay really strict and concise, or do you want to give it more freedom?
Yeah.
So that's kind of a thing that I know exists back there.
Okay.
There's
Yeah,
a
I'm
name for it.
learning too,
I'm
right?
struggling to remember
So
what it's called.
yeah, I'm learning too. So that's good. I'll start looking for it now.
Yeah, we're probably both in the same area where I'm like just behind you because I've thought about going back there and I just haven't gone back to the API yet. But I'm looking at tools that do, and I've also looked at the no code tools because I'm starting to
Yeah.
like think like, how do I build an interface where people can work through this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that's interesting. Essentially, it gives you a way for multiple people to query from Slack the data and pull
Yeah.
from it. Are you
And
writing instructions too on how that data needs to come back?
not yet. That's sort of the next step for me. And
You're just kind of
just
using it as data retrieval.
yeah, for now, right? How I can talk about how I'm using it sort of more specifically, but just to one thing you said. In Slack, I haven't done one with Teams. You can do the same thing with Teams, Microsoft Teams, because the amount of people using Teams, I don't know if anyone's looked at the user base, but Teams is like dramatically more than there's more users in Teams or Slack just by the nature of how many people use Microsoft right through the working world. So you can do both, but there's still limitations to what I'm doing where it's just one channel in Slack. So it's not like I can just call a bot in any channel, but Zapier has built there is a way to do that. I don't know how to do that technically. Zapier's built an integration where you can build that. I think it's like $20 a month. It's a chat bot, and that bot lives agnostic to any channel. So I can go into any channel. I can query the bot with whatever I want to know, and it'll spit out the information to that query within that channel. So that's really interesting. The thing is, it just costs money, right? So that's the
Yep,
trade-off
yep.
we're doing here is like build your own versus buy off the shelf. So it's how I'm sorry, your question was you had a question there and I missed it. I'm sorry. Can we go back to your question? Do you recall what it was?
Is how are you using this then?
Yeah. One of the reasons I wanted to do that, play around with, is like, how can I get access information in real time to like actually address things that are happening in the business? So, you know, we some of the use cases we've seen, we talked about it, is someone has like a transcript they're trying to turn into a blog post, and that's fine. What I care more about is, how can I ideate on the fly and brainstorm and address situations that come up in a company within the operating system that we use. So let me give you an example. I Sales has objections all the time. If we're working in a B2B environment and sales comes up with objections and maybe something comes up where they're not sure how to handle it. And you would see like the chatter in a sales team. This is the question coming in. This is how I've done it in the past and so on, which is fine. What I started doing was I started pinging my chatbot about objections around, say, interviewing customers. Or like one objection I get in my work is, well, the C-suite doesn't want to invest in customer research, right? So I pinged my chatbot. I'm getting this objection. Can you formulate a response to give me some ideas of how I'd battle this objection. And it spits out information on how to do that. Or you can, what I really did was, here's the buyer, here's their business model, here's the problems they're telling me. How can I write an objection to that? Great. Other things I've been doing is, what's the top pain point for this customer? I did a research report for a company that wanted to expand into long haul trucking with their software. So that's one of the data sets I loaded up into ChatGPT. And in Slack, I asked it, okay, what's the top pain? So it gave me the top pain that it faces. And it was, the top pain was securing loads. And loads is like, how do I actually find new like cargo loads to transport? And securing means just like, how do I actually find one to buy and get money from a contract? So I was like, great, write me a blog outline that can talk to that and give me some ideas and pull customer quotes from the interviews that I can put into the blog. And it gave me an outline, gave me the blog. So like, interesting, like that, those are real use cases, because now the team that's working in Slack can see that and say, that's interesting. How can we use that? Create me 4 LinkedIn posts that might talk to this, or we have a campaign coming up. How can I structure a campaign? Or on the reverse side, I took copy from some of the technology stacks that they were talking about and some of the tools they use, and I took their H1 and H2s and ran it against their research in Slack to say, does this fit with the value proposition and the pain points of these buyers? And it would give me some guidance on whether that copy makes sense. It's just really interesting to see how you can use it, because the difference I think with what I'm doing is, I'm not asking ChatGPT to like crawl Bing and give me some answers. I'm using the data that's coming from my customer's point of view, and like it's contextualized in their business model, how they evaluate vendor solutions, and then how can I leverage that information to like actually generate ideas for marketing and sales in the business.
So it's really fascinating. So essentially, you've created a robust buyer persona, and
Yeah,
then you're just able to query it all the time. You're able to ask it different questions, which is way more helpful than going to your
yeah,
buddy and asking, like, hey, do you think this works? How do you feel about this? You
yeah,
can literally just ask ChatGPT, like, hey, based on the buyer persona, is this something that's relevant to them? You can
yeah.
ask them. It's almost like having a panel of your customers that you can
That's
ask all the time.
that's what I was going. So that's where my
Hey,
brain's been
customers, is
going.
this good? What kind
Yeah,
of questions should I be asking here? Hey, it's almost like this. It's free. It's access to your customers all the time if you have a good buyer persona.
yeah. That's the key, right? The data is what's relevant, and you actually said the exact words I've been sort of kicking around in my head for the last couple of weeks. Is customer panel. Anyone that's worked in
Interesting.
B2B for some time, especially with large, medium to large size businesses, that's such a really traditional tool as a vetting process for the things you want to do, whether it's products ideation, campaign ideation, anything, trends. Now, will this replace that? Absolutely not. But if anyone who's worked with panels, they realize it's hard to get these people's attention and get
Yeah,
their
it is.
time, because they're busy. Like, they have their own businesses to run, and you have to respect their time. This is what I care about with this technology, is how do I increase workflow capacity? Like, I don't expect it to like wave this magic wand and it's going to solve all my problems. What I care about is, how do I increase velocity of work, right? And get to outcomes faster. That is like one key way, as someone who's worked customer facing his entire career, of using the technology to help amp, like as a support system to things I'm already doing, right? So maybe I only have to convene my customer panel every so often, because now I have something I can query in real time continually and use it to like inform how I'm thinking about the business.
So another way you could do this is through Chat GPT's like new business account, right? Since you can build and share custom GPTs now.
Yeah,
But that would require everybody in the company having access to a license for the Chat GPT business, which I think is like $50 a month. So that
yeah,
the Slack thing actually becomes way more cost effective, even if you're having to pay the bill of, whatever your Zapier plus
yeah,
whatever API, many API calls you're making. So this becomes a much more cost effective way of doing it
yeah. The
easily.
Just to that, like, I'm not saying this is a solution for everybody, but I audit buying journeys all the time. Like, that's my whole thing. And one of the things I hear consistently over the last 3 years is, I don't want another screen. And I get why. Like, we're all jumping around from tabs to tab, right? Most companies don't want another screen, they want integrations. So this is a way to like sort of leverage a screen they always have open and they don't have to leave it, and you can integrate the two. That's why I liked the idea of approaching it this way,
Yeah.
because it allows them to use the tool they're already using. Then just because it's a question of helping them understand how to do all the stuff that we're doing already in GPTs, but you just have to do it within the operating system they use commonly, which is Slack or Teams. So yeah, but you're right, you could do it that way as well, and there's nothing wrong with doing it the way you just suggested.
Now, this is only pulling information out. It doesn't put information back in. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, correct. So you are at the mercy of the static information that's there. So there's a, there is a, what's the word I'm looking for? It gets old, right? Right. Like, that's the problem with data that's static, is that there's a limitation. There's an age limit to it, right? It's going to age out of its relevancy within a certain time frame. And I know that as someone who works with data and customer research. So
Yeah.
you'll probably at some point have to, refresh the data, or enrich the data, with new learnings as it comes. If that's sort of what you're getting at.
Yeah. Some companies are working on that already, like a AI company known well.
Okay.
They also built an integration for Slack where it's like scanning Slack for mentions of any customer at any time. But
Okay.
their current use case, and I think they're coming up with multiple use cases. It'd be interesting because I'm like, oh, this would be a use case that they could easily tap into, as they've already
Oh
built the
yeah.
integrations. But they're doing it more for like a customer service indicator problem, where it's like we don't know how well a customer is actually doing because the communication spread out across too many places, right?
Yeah.
Slack, email, CRM, social, problem, right? So they're pulling all those informations in, and AI is constantly like checking it. Like, how's this customer doing? New mentions, they're okay. This customer, oh, we saw a social mention and 2 Slack mentions buried in a channel somewhere. Actually, there's a problem here and nobody else knows about it. We should notify the C-suite.
Yeah.
That's what they're working on, which is interesting because it's powerful even if it's static. But if you can make it dynamic, that's kind of like the next level up. But that's obviously like now
Yeah.
you're having to build in proactive
Yeah.
time triggers to go and check the information, where to check it, and then how to deal with it on the back end in order to make it reliable. So it's a harder problem to solve, but that's where we're going.
Yeah, my dream would be, so I did a video of this, right, of my tool, of me going through this. I think you saw it as well, and I knew it would probably get some love, but man, did it ever! Like, my DMs blew up, and that was great because it's just questions as well, right? The people just asking questions about how it works and so on, and like concerns they might have about integrating it. But I had a developer reach out, and were going back and forth around something similar to what you're talking about. Because my dream would be, think of the tech stack that you have in an average company, right? So you probably have some type of CRM, some source of truth, right? Like, where are you keeping information? You have dashboards that are analyzing the performance of the business in different departments, right? How could you use something internally within your core operating system, which I'm just calling Slack or Teams, and you just ping these different tools about different information you want to know in real time. That was the dream. And when we were going back and forth, he said, oh, that's, you're getting up a level now. But I only say that because I imagine that's probably what people are working on, right? Because you've been reliant on, my experience has been, okay, I can maybe get Confluence or Jira to do push notifications or whatever into Slack, and that's fine. But now I'm still at the mercy of having to navigate that channel. I need to know information contextually at a certain moment in time, right? So then I go back to that old problem where I'm scanning the Slack channel for a thing, or then I have to open the tool and find it. So, having something that can then query all these different technology stacks in one area for the key information I want to know, I think would be just, for me, that would be like dynamite.
The trick is, can you build a robust enough one that it can build a good and reliable persona, right? And at
Yeah.
first, you might just build a custom GPT that helps people build their persona. In fact, that's probably a likely thing that you can do.
Yeah, I've
and
seen
you
it.
get enough raw information to build it and just walk through a step-by-step process where it asks you questions, you give it more data
I
in
think
a
so.
way, and then it does some analysis and then crafts it based on a document template that you have. You
Yeah,
could probably
I
build a pretty reliable one.
I know if you go online now, like HubSpot has a version of that, but you have to upload your own data, which is fine. But one of the challenges people are really struggle with is sort of like, and I know this from my own work, is analyzing and codifying and formatting data in the right ways. Like what is important. So you're right. I think that's sort of the next logical step. I'd love to be able to do something like that. We'll see. I'm taking my baby steps. I'm trying to be that person that doesn't get too far ahead of it. I really want to learn how to use this stuff well, right? And
Yes.
in a way that's impactful as opposed to like just sort of chase everything that looks cool, which is so
Right,
easy to
right.
do because it's so,
You don't want to add features just for the sake of adding features when it doesn't actually work well, right? That's
yeah,
most custom GPTs are just like thrown together and they don't work. Like
yeah,
every custom GPT logo maker I've ever tried sucks because, well, Dolly sucks at making logos. Period. So it's kind of like I don't know why you guys are all building custom GPTs around this. Just because it can make images doesn't make just because you can prompt it and try to steer it, it still comes up with crappy logos. So
yeah,
stop.
absolutely. So we'll see. I feel like I'm still just exploring like
Yep.
where I am with this technology.
No, it's good, man. I think what you've put together is a use case that I hadn't heard of yet that I think is highly useful now.
Yeah,
If you have a good persona, being able to put it in and query against it is going to be a fantastic use of custom GPTs because it's going beyond prompt engineering at this point because you're tapping into actual data, which is where AI starts to get really good.
yeah. I w- I spoke with a friend last week. So where I am in my journey, if I may, like to tell you sort of where I'm trying to learn
Yeah.
next. I had a chat last week with a really good friend of mine I've known for years. He's a technical marketer, and last year he took it upon himself to learn coding because he always wanted to learn, which is such just that anyone who wants to even try the basics, I encourage you to do it. Like, what a fantastic skill to try and understand, even at like a 101 level. And he says he has 100 custom GPTs in his repertoire that he's using in a
Oh my
variety of
gosh.
ways. And he knows now like different formatting options. So he's like, he's been testing the 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 effectiveness rates of different formatting. So like a CSV file versus a JSON file, and what are the hallucination rates, and how like what good quality of queries are you getting. He's like been marking that down to try and understand like what's coming
Jeez.
back, and now he's adding scripts into the backend because people might not be aware, but in chat, just in both options, even in the custom GPT, you can add scripting, right, to allow it to sort of navigate, better queries. So because it's the machine, just it needs direction, right, or else it's just going to do what the best job it can do with like really limited directions. That's the route I want to go next. Is just okay. I understand this part. How do I feed it better information and better data and give it better instructions? Because then my gut tells me if I can learn how to do that, then I'll be able to I'll be able to leverage the data that I'm putting in a much more impactful way. I don't know. You tell me. Maybe I'm thinking about it wrong,
Yeah.
but
No, you're
that's
thinking
sort
about
of
it right.
that's
It
where
it
that's
does
where I'm
take a
trying to
lot of
learn
trial and
next.
error
Yeah,
with these custom GPTs. One, and I've only had a few big ahas. I'm like, oh, this is how you get it to be more reliable. But I find I, in general, people load it with too much information and expect it just to like intuitively know how to use the information. Where a
yeah,
human actually, if like the first GPT I made was a life coach and it was a freaking failure because I uploaded a bunch of information about myself, like my strength finders, my life goals, my core values, just as documents, PDFs that I already had. So I'm like, let's just load up all this information. It's going to be so smart. It's going to know
yeah,
everything as a life coach would want to know. And then in the instructions, I'm like, hey, you're a world class life coach. You understand everything about me. And then I left the instructions were very short. Right.
yeah,
But I gave it a basic prompt of who it was and and that it had all the knowledge down there of me. And so I start talking to it. It doesn't know crap about me. It didn't read
yeah.
any of the documents. You
Interesting.
have to go tell it to read the documents. So,
Yeah,
and then, so I folded that. That was way too complex. What I found out with custom GPTs is that the more specific you can get of what you want it to accomplish, the better it is.
yeah,
So what I've learned is like it's a genius intern that lacks common sense.
Oh, I like that.
So if you can, and I remember I've built 2 internships. I remember I had 23 interns working for me at one time and at different levels. Some reported directly to me, some reported to staff members I managed.
Yeah.
But I remember I rotated through interns every year, which means I had
Okay.
to retrain them all. And they started from knowing nothing. They weren't even out of college. They were college freshmen or sophomores. So they knew nothing. But I had to train them how to blog. I had to train them how to design. I had to train them how to do social. So we ended up writing these very insanely detailed SOPs to help them. Like, hey, day one, here's your training. Here's why we do what we do. Here's the general training manual for this thing.
Yeah.
Day two, here's the task that you're going to be doing for the next 2 weeks. Here's how you do the task. Part one, part two, part three, part four. If this, then that. And if you then you go down this rabbit hole, like I outlined their job so much that they could get onboarded because training 20 or 30 of them at a time was just a pain because they're
Yeah.
always coming to you asking you questions. I had to get rid of that. But
Yeah.
otherwise my September would always be shot with them just coming and asking me questions.
I could see
I
that.
had to give
Yeah.
them instructions on how they could figure it out themselves. I found code building custom GPTs is the same thing. You have to feel like, hey, this is who you are. This is your goal. When prompted with this, move to step one. Once you're prompted with this, you need to ask for this. Once they give you this, now ask for this. Once they give you that, now do analysis between these two things and come up with some options. Once they pick an option, then do this. And it's like if you give it the data, it can do remarkable and wonderful things. That's why I know it can come up with a persona, because I'm like, if you could just feed it the data and then tell it to think and just create a step-by-step program for it to do, because you're probably using a step-by-step program to guide yourself. You probably just haven't like written out every tiny little nuanced step of it.
Yeah. Pretty much. Like,
It can execute it. It can execute complex problems or projects if you just break it down into
yeah.
baby steps.
Yeah. Like that's the part I need to sort of get my head around. Because it sounds like you're where I want to be. Right. Because I feel like I'm living your experience a little bit right now, where I can tell it's just got data, but I'm not giving it enough instructions yet. And what's coming is fine, but I know I want to get a bit more precise with how I guide it. I like your analogy. That's a good one, because it is like onboarding someone who's never done this work before, right? Like you have to sort of you have to guide their process. I find with my buyer, like I have my interview course, like how to run customer interviews, my guide, which is very much written in a way that's like a step-by-step narrative instruction, because that's how I built the guide, right? So it actually, the queries for that I find are more impactful, and the information it gives me back is better than the ones with the personas right now, because the personas are exactly what you just said. I just uploaded sort of the framework that I think makes sense, but I need to create an environment where I'm asking it the right questions and giving it the right format, so then it gives me the answers I need. So that's the next part of my journey.
With what you made, it makes sense that it doesn't have a clear end goal that it's trying to accomplish, because
Yeah.
there's so many different use cases for it. So leaving it more ambiguous and light on the instructions is probably a good thing,
Okay.
because again, it becomes a good way to it's good for Q&A. It has a
Yes.
broad amount, like, hey, can you help me write a blog post? Can you check the frame of this? Hey, help me come up with sales objections. They're so all over the place, but
Yeah.
they're all going to be way better because they're based on that information, that it's
That's
actually useful for that. And that's
okay. Good to
where
know.
custom GPTs, they range as far as their use cases, but I find some of the most effective ones are very narrow. And then you should just have an army of them, of narrowly defined ones. And then you should have some broad ones too. I think everybody should have a co-pilot that has a bunch of business documentations of like your stuff that you
Oh,
can
that's a good
query
idea.
against, because instead of you having to upload like, oh, here's my business strategy based on my business strategy.
Oh
No, it just
man.
already knows the business strategy, but you have to tell it to go access it. Hey,
You know how many
based on
times I
that
have to
thing that I
check my
gave you.
business? You know how many times I have to check my corporation information because I forget the number?
Exactly. Yeah.
And
So
I've
if it
been
already
like
knows that stuff, you can just query it.
I'm just going through my Google Drive. I'm like, my God, where's that PDF again?
But what you made is probably one of the most useful use cases I've seen of custom GPTs so
Oh,
far.
cool. Well, I
There's a lot of
appreciate
ones
that.
that are just garbage out there. I think copilots is a broad term now for how to use
Okay.
it, but this persona one is probably one of the most helpful things that every marketer needs to have this built like
Okay.
ASAP.
Well, that makes me feel so good because I
Yeah.
feel like I'm just bumbling my way
That's why
through.
instantly I'm like, we got to talk about this because I think this is actually going to be like one of the most useful use cases I've seen of this so
Oh,
far.
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Look at
Yeah.
me finding
Because
out
I've
stuff.
seen it. Yeah. I at the last company I worked for, they had a beautiful, well researched persona.
Yeah.
It sat in a folder. Well, it sat on like a Notion type database, looking all pretty. And of
Yeah.
course, the writers referenced it sometimes, but we weren't constantly referencing it. But we
Yeah.
needed to. They like so much time had been taken into doing the research for it, and all the calls and all the organizing of the calls and all the actually tabulating how often people said this and the words they used to build the persona. It was a beautiful persona.
Yeah.
It was accurate.
Yeah.
If in what you've made, if we would have set it up that way, we would have been able to get like 10 times more out of it. Our marketing would have hit 10 times harder in way more places because it would have been so easy to query.
Yeah. And I live and breathe this stuff. Like I have an unhealthy obsession about how buyers make decisions.
Yeah.
Probably that's sometimes how I frame it. But that's always been an asset for me in my career. But what I've realized is not everyone thinks that way instinctively, especially in marketing, where these days, you're behind a keyboard and a screen for most of it. But I grew up in the world of marketing where I lived in the center of how buyers made decisions, and you're talking to them and talking to sales teams every day, and you're just having those interactions. And I think you lose something around the you know the knowledge the company has internally around how you're trying to serve your customers without those daily interactions with teams. So yeah, like
So
I just
your
want.
next task is, because most people, if they have a buyer persona, then setting up what you've made isn't too big of a leap, even if they're just dumping it into a custom GPT and then taking the time to set up like, or working with you to set it up more likely, because
Yeah.
what you've done, no one's going to do. But it's well worth paying someone like you to set it up
I'm
because it would make their marketing 10 times more effective if they have a good buyer persona.
Well, I'm
So I'm
happy to help.
endorsing, like, everybody needs to pay you to set it up because it would be the leverage you would get on it would be well worth it.
Well,
Well
I'm
worth
happy
it
to
if
help.
everybody's using it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So please hire Ryan. But a lot of people don't even have good personas.
Yeah.
So that becomes the next thing that I'm sure you can take, the book buyer persona, try to like find the 80/20 of it and try to figure out how to create a custom GPT that could get people to a place where it's like, it's not great, but it's not bad.
Yeah.
What's a C plus version of the buyer persona based on the data they already have without having to go get more that would make their marketing more effective? Not as good as
Yeah.
it could be if they did the proper research, but what
Yeah.
does it look like? How do you do that
Abs-
with the GPT? That would be an interesting problem to work on,
you know what? Maybe that'll be my next one.
because then it crafts well. Because if they could figure out that, then they could hire you to like map to it all the time. You know what I'm
Perfect.
saying?
I love it. Look at you
Yeah.
giving me ideas. So good.
I'm just excited, man, because I think AI can help figure out a lot of these problems, or at least make it easier for a lot of these
Yeah.
people. Like we used to do show Bibles for people at Sweetfish, so I turned that into a GPT. Is it as good as having a podcast strategist come up with a show Bible for your show? Heck no. Is it way better than having nothing? 100%. But
Yeah.
the chat GPT does the research for you. It's like, well, what are you talking about and who's the audience? And then it goes and it just does some basic Bing research on like, who's the audience, what are their pain points, what keeps them awake at night, what are their things they're anticipating. And it just goes and reads articles about all these things. So it's not as great as talking to your audience, but you know what? Did you go and read all the articles about all those things? Probably not. You know what I'm saying?
No.
So, and it comes up with an analysis of like, what are the major pain points of the audience based on the topic you want to talk about? How do we collect these things? And then how do we build a show Bible off of that? And then it walks through a step-by-step process in building the Bible
Yeah.
to guide the show. And it's way better than nothing, but it's obviously not, it's not doing search for articles and analysis on those isn't as good as talking to people themselves, but it's a step.
Yeah.
Well,
I agree with
cool.
that.
Ryan, this has been a fantastic conversation. Where
Thanks.
can people go to learn more about what you're doing here? and how to
Ooh.
contact you if they want to see what it looks like to build this for their company.
Yeah. So I'm like you. I live on LinkedIn, so they can find me there. Just type in Ryan Paul Gibson, and I will be the first person that pops up. Or my website is contentlift.io, and I have on my website the video that you saw on LinkedIn. I just uploaded it to Vimeo, and you can just sort of see it. And I'm just happy to talk about this. Like, I don't expect anyone to jump in feet first, because one of like that, I got a lot of DMs, and there was a lot of questions around like security and how do I format the data, and you know, you can tell people want to sort of understand this, but there's still hesitation, and I totally understand that. So happy just to talk to anybody and see if this is something that makes sense for them.
Fantastic. This has been an awesome conversation. I'm looking forward to diving in. I need to dive into the APIs, kind of like my next step that I haven't done yet, that I'm like, ooh, I need to get back there and start digging around there
Yeah, for
in my
sure.
own growth as a marketer. Cool. Well, remember, AI won't replace marketers, but will empower them with superpowers to do more with less. So let's level up together, one skill at a time.